I never believed in omens, but that day I should have. The cold bit into my skin as I trudged through the knee-deep snow, my rifle slung over my shoulder, breath hanging in the air like a frozen ghost. The forest was silent, unnervingly so. Not the usual quiet of winter, but an eerie, suffocating stillness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I had been patrolling this part of the park for years. I knew every tree, every sound, every sign of life. But today something felt wrong. Then I saw them. Tracks. Pack of wolves. Their prints cut deep into the snow, all heading in the same direction. But that wasn't what made my gut tighten. Wolves usually spread out when hunting, flanking their prey, using numbers to their advantage. But these tracks weren't scattered, they were unified, focused, like soldiers on a mission. I crouched down, running my gloved fingers along the edges of the prints. Fresh, maybe an hour old at most. My eyes followed the trail, scanning the surroundings, searching for what had drawn them together like this. And then I saw another set of tracks. Smaller, lighter, the signature padded prints of a bobcat. I exhaled slowly, my breath fogging the cold air. A lone bobcat out here wasn't unusual, but something about these tracks sent a chill deeper into my bones than the cold ever could. The prints were erratic, desperate, not the quiet, calculated movements of a seasoned predator, but the frantic, zigzagging path of something being chased. My pulse quickened. I followed the prints, stepping carefully, my senses tuned to every snap of a branch, every whisper of the wind. Then, about 20 yards ahead, I found what I feared. Smaller tracks. A cub. My jaw clenched. A mother bobcat and her cub, alone in the dead of winter, being pursued by a coordinated pack of wolves. It didn't make sense. Wolves typically avoided adult bobcats. Too risky, not enough reward. But this wasn't normal. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me. This was nature's way, the cycle of life, predator and prey. But something gnawed at my gut, a whisper in the back of my mind telling me I wasn't just witnessing a hunt. I was witnessing something else. A trap? A revenge hunt? Wolves didn't act out of vengeance. They were efficient, logical killers. But this pursuit had an intensity, a singular focus that I'd never seen before. A branch snapped somewhere in the distance. I froze. The forest held its breath. Then, a low, guttural growl rolled through the trees, deep and menacing. Not from a wolf, not from a bobcat. Another predator was out here, and I had just walked right into its path. The moment stretched, frozen in time. The growl had come from ahead, deep and guttural, vibrating through the air like a warning. I gripped my rifle tighter, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then movement. A blur of brown and gray shot through the trees. A small shape, desperate, fast, racing across the snow-covered ground. The bobcat cub. It wasn't running randomly. It was being herded. The wolves were nowhere in sight, but I knew they were there. Invisible phantoms moving between the trees, controlling the cub's path like expert hunters. I took a step forward, heart pounding. My breath came in sharp bursts, misting in the cold. The cub darted left, then right, confused, frantic. It was running toward something. My eyes shot up. A steep drop. The cub was heading straight for the ravine. Shit! I muttered under my breath, lifting my rifle instinctively, not to shoot but to scope. My sights landed on the cub and beyond it, something else. The mother. She stood near the edge of the ravine, her muscles taut, her ears flattened, tail twitching. But she wasn't preparing to pounce or run. She was waiting, my stomach twisted. She wasn't acting like a mother trying to save her young. She was acting like prey caught in a trap. And then the wolves emerged. 3 of them. They moved with eerie precision, cutting off every possible escape. Their breath steamed in the cold, their golden eyes locked on the cub. Not on the mother. Not yet. What the hell was this? I took another step forward, crunching the snow beneath my boot. One of the wolves' ears twitched, its head snapping toward me for the briefest second. But they didn't retreat. They weren't afraid. That's when I realized they were executing a plan. The cub had no way out. The mother was standing in place, unnatural stillness tightening every inch of her body. The wolves were in control. This wasn't just a hunt. This was an execution, and I had walked straight into the middle of it. The world exploded into motion. The first wolf lunged, jaws snapping, aiming straight for the cub. But the mother bobcat moved faster than I thought possible. A blur of muscle and fur, she launched herself at the attacker with a guttural snarl, claws raking across its face. The wolf yelped, stumbling back, but another was already there to take its place. Chaos. The wolves worked together like a single entity. Every time the mother struck one away, another slipped in to flank her. They weren't just trying to kill her. They were trying to exhaust her. I gritted my teeth, my hands tightening on my rifle. The cub was frozen, eyes wide, caught between its mother and the fight that could very well end her life. The largest wolf, the alpha, circled the fight, waiting for its moment. Watching, calculating. I knew this feeling, the unbearable weight of knowing something needed to be done but not knowing if I was supposed to be the one to do it. Interfering with a hunt wasn't just breaking the rules of nature, it was breaking the laws of the park. But watching a mother fight a losing battle against impossible odds, my gut churned. I had to decide. A wolf lunged and clamped its jaws around the mother's hind leg. A sharp cry tore from her throat, but she twisted, raking its side with her claws. Blood sprayed across the snow. She broke free, but her movement was slower now. She wasn't going to last. I raised my rifle, aiming just above the wolves. A warning shot. That was all I needed to give her a chance. I exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the shot shattered the air. The wolves flinched. The cub bolted. And the mother? She didn't run. She turned toward me, and for the briefest second our eyes locked. Not in fear, not in relief, in something else. Something I didn't understand. Then the wolves snapped out of their hesitation. The alpha let out a bone-chilling growl. The pack refocused, and I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The mother bobcat suddenly shifted her stance. She wasn't just injured, she was calculating. A wolf lunged, and instead of dodging, she reared up and raked her claws across its throat. The wolf collapsed, blood dark against the white snow. The pack hesitated. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The cub, sensing an opening, sprinted toward the tree line. One of the wolves made a move to intercept, but I stepped forward, my rifle still raised. I wasn't going to shoot, but they didn't know that. The alpha finally broke its silence, letting out a low, warning growl. The other wolves backed off, their golden eyes shifting between me, the mother, and her cub. The balance had changed. For now, the mother bobcat took one last look at me before turning, limping, and vanishing into the trees after her cub. The wolves remained still for a few moments longer before slowly retreating. I exhaled sharply, realizing I'd been holding my breath. What the hell had just happened? For a moment, everything was still. The wolves weren't chasing. The bobcat wasn't running. The air itself felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't explain. My rifle was still raised, my breath uneven, but I knew, whatever had just happened, it wasn't because of me. The wolves, all of them, had their heads turned in the same direction. Their ears were flat, bodies tense, muscles coiled but frozen in place. They weren't looking at me. They weren't looking at the bobcat. They were looking at something behind me. A cold sweat prickled down my back. I turned, slowly, every nerve in my body screaming for me to move faster, but instinct held me still. When I finally faced the direction they were staring, I saw nothing. Just trees, snow, darkness creeping between the trunks as the sun dipped lower on the horizon. And then a sound. Not a growl, not a howl, something deeper. A vibration that seemed to come from beneath the earth itself, rattling through my bones. The wolves broke first. One by one, they turned, tails low, bodies crouched, moving back into the forest with an urgency that bordered on panic. Not a retreat, a flight. The alpha lingered for a second longer, staring past me with an expression I had never seen on a predator like this. Not dominance, not hunger, something close to fear. Then, without another sound, it disappeared into the trees, vanishing like a ghost in the snowfall. I swallowed hard, my grip tightening on my rifle. Whatever had made them leave, it was still here, a soft rustling behind me. I turned back sharply, expecting to see the mother bobcat, expecting her to bolt now that the immediate danger was gone. But she wasn't running. She was still standing there, her injured leg shaking under her weight, but her body upright, her gaze locked on the same empty space the wolves had just fled from. The cub was pressed against her, tiny, fragile, but not moving, waiting. And then, she did something that sent a shiver down my spine. She looked at me, not like an animal looks at a human, not with instinct or fear, with understanding, as if she knew exactly what I was seeing, as if she was waiting to see what I would do next. I didn't move, couldn't. Then, without a sound, she nudged her cub toward the trees, urging it forward. The little one hesitated, then obeyed, disappearing into the safety of the forest. She stayed behind for just a moment longer, watching me, and then she was gone. The silence returned, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. My breath felt too loud. My pulse pounded in my ears. I forced myself to lower my rifle, my arms stiff, my fingers numb from the cold, and something else. Something deeper. I was alone again, except I wasn't. Because whatever had stopped those wolves, whatever had made that sound, whatever had stood behind me in the trees, I never saw it. But I knew it was still there, and it was watching me. The forest was dead silent. I stood there, rifle still in my hands, breath heavy and uneven. The wolves were gone. The bobcat and her cub had vanished into the shadows. But the weight of something unseen still pressed against me, wrapping around my chest like a vice. It wasn't over. I took a slow step forward, my boots crunching against the frozen ground. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to walk away and pretend none of this had happened. But I couldn't. Not yet. Something had made those wolves run. Something had made that sound. And if it was still here, I had to know. The trees stretched tall and lifeless, their bare branches clawing at the darkening sky. The wind had stopped completely. Not even the usual rustle of shifting snow or distant bird calls. It was unnatural. Wrong. Then I saw them. Tracks. Fresh ones. Not wolf. Not bobcat. Larger. Deeper. I swallowed hard, crouching beside them. The imprints were wide, longer than my hand, pressed deep into the frozen surface as if whatever had made them was impossibly heavy. The spacing was strange, uneven. I ran a gloved hand over the impression, my pulse hammering in my ears. The claw marks dug deep at the tips. Something had walked this path, and it wasn't running. It was stalking. A soft rustling caught my attention. My head snapped up just as a shadow moved at the edge of my vision. The mother bobcat. She stood just beyond the tree line, her body low, her injured leg barely holding her weight. Her cub pressed against her side, trembling. But she wasn't looking at me. She was looking past me. I turned, slowly, the hair on my arms rising under my jacket. The forest remained still, but I wasn't fooled. The bobcat let out a low, rumbling sound, half growl, half warning. Her ears were flattened, her body tense. I expected her to run, to retreat deeper into the woods. But she didn't. She stayed, because she was afraid. Not of me, not of the wolves, of something else. I swallowed hard. My throat was dry. The weight in my gut told me to listen to her, to leave. But my body refused to move. Then I heard it. A sound that had no place in this world. Deep, hollow, a vibration more than a noise. It rumbled through the trees, through my bones, through my skull. Low and resonant, like the echo of something ancient. The bobcat hissed, pressing her cub behind her. Every muscle in her body locked in fear, and I couldn't breathe. The silence after the sound was worse than the sound itself. I had to get out of here. Now, I couldn't move. The sound had faded, but its weight still pressed down on me. My breath was shallow, my pulse erratic. My instincts screamed at me to run, to leave this place and never look back. But my feet were frozen in place. The bobcat mother remained rigid, ears pinned back, eyes locked on the empty forest beyond me. Her cub shivered at her side, pressing close to her injured leg, but she didn't move. And then, without warning, she turned and bolted. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look back. She ran like something was already at her heels. I swallowed hard. My fingers clenched around the rifle, knuckles white from the pressure. My gaze darted around the clearing, searching, waiting. The wind had picked up, stirring the branches, but that wasn't what sent my stomach into a free fall. It was the wolves. They weren't hunting anymore. They were running, not in an organized retreat, not regrouping for another attack. This was panic. Their tails were tucked low, their heads down, their movements erratic. They weren't predators anymore. They were prey, and I still didn't know what was chasing them. The alpha was the last to leave. He stood for a second longer than the others, his massive frame tense, golden eyes scanning the same darkness that had frozen me in place. Then, as if making some silent decision, he turned and disappeared into the trees. A deep silence followed, a silence so thick, so unnatural that it felt alive. Something shifted in the air. I didn't see it, I didn't hear it, but I felt it. I finally forced myself to take a step back. Then another. My body moved on instinct now, my brain unable to keep up with what was happening. Every fiber of my being screamed that I had no business being here, that I was standing in a place I was never meant to see. I turned and started walking. Then I started running. My boots pounded against the frozen earth, breath ragged, the rifle clutched tightly against my chest. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Whatever had driven those wolves into the depths of fear, whatever had made a mother bobcat abandon all reason, was still behind me, and I wasn't going to wait to find out what it was. I ran until my legs burned, until my breath came in ragged gasps, until the cold air sliced through my throat like a knife. But even as I put distance between myself and whatever was out there, the feeling didn't fade. I should have kept going. I should have left and never looked back. But I stopped, bent over, hands on my knees. I forced myself to breathe. My pulse was hammering, but my thoughts were sharper now. The wolves had fled. The bobcat had fled, and I was still here. Something deep inside me whispered that this was my last chance to turn away, to leave this place and pretend I never saw any of it. But another part of me, the part that had spent years patrolling these forests, learning its rhythms, understanding its creatures, knew that if I left now, I'd never be able to forget. I had to see it. Swallowing hard, I turned back. The forest had returned to an eerie stillness. No birds, no wind, just the soft crunch of my boots as I retraced my steps. I moved slowly, my body coiled tight, ready to run at the first sign of danger. And then I saw it, clearing. It hadn't been there before, or maybe I just hadn't noticed it in my panic. But now, as I stepped into the open space, the air changed, felt heavier. The pressure in my chest deepened, an instinctive response I couldn't shake. The snow here was untouched, pristine, but something was wrong. My eyes scanned the ground, and then I saw them. The tracks, the same ones I had found earlier, the ones that didn't belong to any animal I knew. They crisscrossed the clearing, weaving in erratic, impossible patterns. Some stopped abruptly, as if whatever made them had simply vanished into thin air. I crouched, reaching out a gloved hand to the nearest one. It was deep, impossibly deep, as if whatever had stepped here had weighed more than anything that should exist in these woods. A shadow moved in my peripheral vision. I jerked my head up, heart slamming against my ribs. But there was nothing, just trees, just darkness creeping in as the last light of day faded. Then a sound, not the deep rumble from before, something softer, closer, breathing, right behind me. My entire body locked up. My fingers twitched toward my rifle, but I already knew it wouldn't matter. Whatever was standing there, whatever had been out here all along, I had just made my choice, and now I had to face it. Time passed, but the feeling never left me. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I told myself I would let it go, that whatever happened in that forest was behind me. But I knew better. The patrols felt different now. The trees no longer just trees. The silence no longer just silence. Every shadow felt deeper. Every gust of wind carried a weight I couldn't explain. I had tried to make sense of it. I mapped out where it happened, studied animal migration patterns, read every documented case of wolves fleeing en masse. I even looked into seismic activity, anything that could explain that sound, that vibration in my bones. Nothing. No reports. No signs. No explanations. No one believed me. I told my supervisor about the wolves acting strangely. He shrugged it off, said sometimes nature does things we can't predict. I mentioned the tracks I had found. He said I must have misidentified them. I didn't argue. What could I say? That I had felt something watching me? That I had heard a sound that didn't belong to any living creature I had ever encountered? I would sound insane. And maybe I was. But I couldn't shake the truth that settled deep in my gut. Something was out there. Something the wolves feared. Something even a wounded bobcat, outmatched and bleeding, had known was more dangerous than the predators hunting her. I tried to go back. A month after that night, I hiked to the same spot, following my own tracks from memory. The clearing was still there, but it felt empty. The snow was untouched. No signs of struggle. No tracks. No proof that anything had ever happened. But I knew better. I stood there for a long time, rifle slung over my shoulder, boots sinking slightly into the frost-hardened ground. The air was cold. Still, the same unnatural silence wrapping around me like a warning. Then, just as I turned to leave, I heard it. Not the deep, earth-shaking rumble from that night. Not the hollow vibration that sent the wolves running. Something smaller, more deliberate. Footsteps, just beyond the tree line. Slow, measured, watching. I didn't wait. This time I left. I don't go back there anymore. I stick to my usual routes, I follow the protocol, I do my job. But every now and then, when the wind dies down and the trees stand perfectly still, I feel it again. The weight, the presence. A reminder that nature isn't just what we see. It's what we don't. It's what watches when we think we're alone. And sometimes it lets us go.